Thank you so much, Esther, for that great introduction. Now it's my turn to do a round of introductions. So you already know Theodore Boone, who made the keynote lecture. He's a lawyer and an off-counsel at Danton's Budapest, but he's also a faculty member at Corvinus. Then we have Norbert Gaál, who is an economist, a user experience designer and expert, and he's a chief platform officer at bupa.hu. Then Márton Karsai, network and data scientist at Central European University. Adrienn Ujhelyi, social psychologist from ELTE Budapest. And Atoosa Kasirzadeh, who is a philosopher and a mathematician at the University of Edinburgh, and also the director of research at the Center for Technomorrow Futures. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our panel discussion, where we're going to unpack and further discuss the topics that were already raised by Ted. So Ted already mentioned that AI is becoming a ubiquitous part of our lives. He mentioned great examples of AIs making socially consequential decisions, such as making decisions about whether we get loans, and if we do, with what kind of interest rates, whether we get a job. Just today, I was sent an interesting screenshot from LinkedIn, which showed that Revolut has gotten almost 800,000 applicants just this year. So you can imagine if a company gets almost 1 million applicants a year, that then they need to use, and they will use, some kind of CV scanning AI tool. And we will talk about how we can kind of take some kind of control over what's exactly happening with those tools. Same goes for college admissions, or another example mentioned by Ted, whether we get a parole in judiciary decisions, or another area where Norbert will be our expert, trading, decisions about whether we should buy this or that stocks. That's an important area as well. So let's start with discussing a topic that I'm quite sure you've all heard about. It's the open letter signed by various, I'm seeing a lot of nodding around, signed by various tech leaders around the world in March this year, calling for a halt in developing AI and saying, let's wait a minute, actually let's wait 6 months with developing AI systems that are stronger than GPT-4. So Atoosa here, I know you signed this petition, and I wanted to ask you what risks this 6-month hold is trying to mitigate, and why you signed this petition.
Okay. So yeah, as you mentioned, this letter called for a ban on a specific kind of AI systems, like those AI systems that are more powerful than GPT-4. The reason for that is that AI models like GPT-4 can be used in many different applications. So they are called like general purpose AI. They can be used in medicine. They can improve the quality of, for example, medical diagnosis, cancer diagnosis. They can also be used for development of killer robots. They can also be used at the borders. They can be used for surveillance. And they can be used very impactfully for the development of very realistic images and realistic text. So after ChatGPT was released, and of course these generative models have been in the process of development for a couple of years, but when the whole public became suddenly familiar by ChatGPT and the attention that the system received, a lot of people started really worrying about the impact of these systems on democracy, on our epistemic life, how we trust different sets of knowledge, right? When we are, for example, all of us are using social media, and then in social media we got exposed to many different content, and if this content is not generated by humans or are not coming from powerful sources or legitimate sources, you can imagine we lose our ability to judge whether something is good or not. Many people also very much worried about the use of these systems in the development of drones, and so a couple of scientists called for the ban of the development of these systems by big AI labs, because general purpose generative models are being used by very specific labs, artificial intelligence labs. Academia is not making significant progress because the compute power that companies like OpenAI and Google DeepMind and Microsoft have access to is not accessible to different kind of people. So that letter, for me, I think many different people have different reasons for signing it. For me, it was more a metaphoric kind of statement to bring attention to the significant impacts of this work, of the systems, that we don't know where we are going by the systems, and maybe we have to slow down, maybe we have to talk, and maybe we have to consider the implications much more carefully.
Yeah, thank you so much. And at the end of the letter, we hear a call for more transparency, and that's almost like a buzzword that's being thrown around a lot. That the first step in order to take some kind of control is to have transparency. So I think it's important in this panel discussion to kind of unpack and dissect what exactly we mean by transparency. So Atoosa, you mentioned social media, so let's start with a very kind of tangible example. You scroll through social media, see a personalized ad, and then if you click on it, you might be able to see some kind of explanation offered as to why am I seeing this ad or something like that. And I was wondering if that qualifies as being transparent. So let's start with the side of the data that has been gathered about us and that made possible this personalized ad. So if we click on why we're seeing this ad, we might see a short explanation about, say, your age group. Is that enough data transparency about gathering data? Márton, a guided question.
Thank you very much. First of all, hello everyone. Short answer is no, and the long answer is no. So actually, as Ted already said in the keynote speech, that all these AI systems being now or in the future are going to be fed by data, what is generated by us. So actually, the moment we get up in the morning till the moment they go in the evening to sleep, and even during we sleep, we are generating data. And this data, this behavioral data, physiological data, is actually gathered, combined, sold, even without our knowledge. We supposed to sign a consent when actually we sign up for a given services, but we have no idea how this data is circling around and how it is capitalized, so to speak, in the AI systems. So when I see an ad, for example, online, and I just see that what are those features which has been used from the data collected about myself in order to receive that this ad in my face, it cannot be transparent because it is not actually indicating for what purpose the data was collected, through which surface this data was collected, how long this data was collected. Think about your location, for example. I think location of people is one of the most sensitive information, because just by following where you are, I can tell you after 2 days where you live, where you work, where you go to school, where your kids go to school, where you shop, and so on and so forth. And the best example for this kind of, sensitivity of data was a scandal which was about 3 years ago. There was a New York Times articles where they were indicating that just by following the whereabouts of people, location data what you can buy for a couple of $1,000s about hundreds of thousands of people, you can do it, I can do it, I have done it. For scientific purposes, you can actually follow how people working in the White House move around, and you can identify the workplace or even secret, I don't know, state buildings or the home location of generals, which of course has some national security threat. So what I mean with all this is that data what is collected about you is on what all these AI systems are fed. And this is, I think, the first point of transparency that we have to address.
So what kind of explanation should we be provided with? Should we be then provided with a very unpacked and kind of detailed explanation? Would that help? Maybe, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think the first point to make these things better is in education, so people should be aware what kind of data is collected about them. And of course, the companies are responsible to you as a person, but actually could be like go against standards which are proposed by authorities. So, for example, if I'm a large company and I'm building a system based on behavioral data, I should have those certificates that I can collect this data.
And from a psychological point of view, what is the effect of a system which has a very important causal influence on us, but one which we don't really understand well?
I think all of you have already tried ChatGPT. All of you? Have you revealed any private information about yourself? Your boyfriend? Girl? No? Okay, you're a bit older than my students, because when I first asked them that what do you do, what type of question do you usually ask from ChatGPT, their answer was that relationship advice. What the fuck? I'm a boomer, apparently, so maybe not just that type of unintentional data gathering is scary, but rather the things that we are eagerly reveal about ourselves, that's very intimate. And yeah, maybe it's not very politically correct to ask you, but do you know anything, not that you tried, just do you ever heard about any psychological type of applications in order to prevent depression, suicide? Have you ever heard about this, like Vobot? Yeah, you heard about this? Have you tried? So it's just a chatbot. You can download it into your messenger, and you can have a chat with an AI, with a machine. Do you think that you would have tried that? Do you think it works as a psychologist? It's fucking good. I mean, if you are that desperate and you don't have access to a human therapist, you must try. It uses the latest behavioral cognitive therapy techniques, and it works. Okay, I have to stop here because it's getting, I can see their faces, they are scared.
Yeah, so it seems we need some kind of transparency about how these systems work. We need some kind of transparency about how the data that is gathered about us is gathered and is processed. And we need some kind of transparency about the effect the system has upon us. So it seems that the reason why we talk about transparency a lot is because it seems that that's a necessary feature for trust. So again, Adrienn, I wanted to ask you if you think there's a difference between the way or the requirements that we need to trust an AI system and the ones that we need to trust a human being. Is it good to start out from our understanding of interpersonal trust to better understand trust in AI?
Yeah, I think it's surprisingly transferable. I mean, we are social animals. We were born, we were evolutionary wired in that way. So, again, if you ever try ChatGPT, have you done anything polite? So, because when I first asked, I didn't know how to ask. I didn't just simply ask a question. Please, can you answer? And I thanked. And sometimes I wrote that lol, that because it was really a funny answer. So I think we are behaving as like we would toward a human. And yeah, there are so many psychological theories on that we have this initial trust in the machines as well, because we are just projecting that it's a human being and we behaving the very same way.
Yeah, Norbert, go ahead. From a user experience point of view.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. I think that in terms of trust, we would need to talk about what the definition of intelligence, and the definition of intelligence is very, I would say, easy, because it's just about solving problems. Basically, this is about. But if we check our human history, there is one more thing besides of intelligence, which is consciousness. And in our human history, intelligence and consciousness, the ability to feel pain, feel happiness, feel regret, is developing hand in hand. But now, we created a system which definitely has high intelligence with zero consciousness. And I think that in terms of trust, we need to consider that should we trust in something which has high intelligence without any consciousness? Because I think that this is one of the important questions what we need to think about and answer. And of course, this is why transparency is needed. And I think that in terms of transparency, at least there is 3 layers of transparency. The first is the data, where it's coming from. The second is what is the context. So I need to understand why am I getting this ad, or why am I getting this advice from the machine. And the third one, I think one of the most important one, is that what will be the consequence if I'm taking the recommendation from a machine? What is the effect on in my life and on my life? I think that these are the questions what we need to answer and take into consideration in terms of transparency.
Yeah, Atoosa, go ahead.
If I may, I would like to give a different perspective on this. So I don't think the notion of intelligence is a simple term. Like when we look into psychological theories of intelligence, there are many different theories of intelligence. Some theories, for example, say different cultures, like there are different empirical studies showing that different people in different cultures behave in different ways, and according to the different ways of behaving, they would be labeled intelligent in one culture, not intelligent in another culture. The notion of artificial intelligence was, this whole discipline was developed in the United States with a bunch of men from a very different perspective, right? But the idea was that we need to reduce the whole complexity of human intelligence, emotional intelligence, social intelligence, into some numbers that we can measure, and then we can make machines that kind of adapt to that numbers, right? So that is one way to think about to think about intelligence, but again, we do not have necessarily systems that are fully intelligent or are as intelligent as humans. Just the philosophical side of me wanted to kind of comment on this. And then, again, when we think about artificial intelligence, I think for me the most useful way to think about it is to think about complex algorithmic systems. These algorithmic systems have different design features. There are different computational theories, different mathematical theories that underpin them. One specific kind of algorithmic systems known as deep neural networks that are the basis of most of the machine learning systems that we see, for example, GPT-3, GPT-4, they kind of learn in a way that even for computer scientists, it's very hard to understand how they're learning. And because of that, a lot of computer scientists are interested in getting into the transparency of those algorithmic systems, and they still don't know how to do it. There are different methods that they're developing, but it's an open research question. Yeah.
And we often hear that that there are black box problems with AI as well, when even the designers of AI don't, or maybe even cannot completely understand how exactly it arrives at an output, a decision. So I wanted to ask you about that as well, Márton, maybe. Do we face real black box problems?
Oh, we face every day, of course. One of the most famous black box problem was it's a juridistic program which was applied in the United States to help judges to convict or not convict, or let people for parole or not. And it was based on a data set which contained the minority groups. And of course, the outcome of this data set was very, very biased, giving, a biased judgment, or suggesting biased judgments for certain minority groups. And it was because the original training data itself was biased, because it was based on the last 50 years of juridistic data of the United States. So now the question is that if you have problems like this, which is as an effect, as a consequence, is changing the life of people, how can you use these systems at all? And there are different ways how you can identify these biases. First, one way of doing this is continuous auditing, and I think we will learn about this later. Another way is to see that what we would like to have actually is that we have two people in front of us. They are exactly the same terms of the data they represent, and we would like to have a similar outcome for both of these people, independent whether they're coming from one minority group or they are coming from a majority group. So what we can see on the individual level, this is our goal, what we can see on the population level, how our model is making a mistake. If our model is making a larger number of mistakes for one minority group, we can identify that actually our model is biased because it is not making such accurate predictions for one minority group than to another one. But there are many other techniques that one can identify that the system is biased, and it is inherited actually from the data behind, which was originally biased. Another technique would be is that we forget about the skewed distribution of people with different minority groups, and we just take exactly the same number of people from each minority group, which would lead to a less biased system.
Could you give us an example of such a bias against minority groups? Like,
as I just mentioned, in this case, the bias was that actually Afro-American people were actually suggested for a negative judgment with a higher rate than actually they should have based on the representativeness of the data.
so you mentioned, Márton, continuous auditing, and this is where I wanted to bring you in, Ted. Can you, I hope you've had a moment to...
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, to lay back. So how should we imagine an auditing process in brief? What happens at an algorithm auditing? As a lawyer, help us navigate this field.
Thank you. I appreciate that question. Appreciate the opportunity to catch my breath, too. The concept of auditing relates very much to the concept of transparency. That is, being able to understand where the decision came from. And the short answer to that question is, I think it's a huge problem because of the nature of the machine learning, where these systems are, in effect, teaching themselves. They're teaching themselves. And so I essentially, at this point, when you're using that kind of decision-making, it is very difficult, if not in certain circumstances, not possible to trace back that system, which is another reason why it's very important to question it. Now, you could look at a different route and say, okay, here's the start, here's the answer. In my mind, based on my non-artificial intelligence, based on my gray matter, does that decision make sense? And so that's how I look at it. In certain these systems, you're not going to be able to connect the dots. But if you look at the start and the finish, is it a plausible, is it a reasonable decision to make?
So you mentioned in your talk the EU AI Act, which is in the making, and probably there will be it will be enacted by the end of this year even. So the EU takes a risk-based approach, right? And it seems that even moderate risk and especially high risk AI systems will face continuous auditing. And I wanted to get a bit into these, well, the risk-based approach to begin with, and these various categories of high risk, moderate risk, unacceptable risk. Could you perhaps, any of you, provide me with examples of what kind of AI systems will very likely end up in, say, the unacceptable risk category? What is it that the EU does not want to allow at all?
I think that Ted already mentioned the facial recognition, but I think that there is another one which is, I mentioned earlier, which is at least concerning question, the CBDC question, the central bank digital currency question. And I don't know how many of you have you ever heard about CBDC?
Yeah, I think that needs a bit of unpacking.
Yeah, explanation. The central bank digital currency. which is basically right now our financial system is two-layer system. There are commercial banks and also the central bank. And basically, it's an idea or it's a vision about a controlled digital currency by the central bank, which is based on AI and also blockchain. And I think that this is a question where it's not an easy question to decide that this is already in our privacy, and this is this is kind of an Orwell thing. Where you need to understand that this is the border which is too much in my life or not.
Thanks. On the auditing question, one other point I wanted to make, which is, I think, easier on the auditing side, and that is this point of human oversight, that you can, even if you don't know how the decision was made, you have a human involved in actually implementing that decision. And that's a key point of, to your point, the EU AI Act, when, say, a high-risk system is being looked at, then they would look at the question, is a human truly in the process of okaying this decision prior to its implementation? Thank you.
Go ahead.
The AI Act singles out another example as a high-risk category, which is about social scoring, meaning actually that people are ranked or associated with a number based on their socioeconomic status, ethnic background, educational background, and so on and so forth, which is a bad example. And let me give a comment here. When I was reading the Act, I had the impression that actually it's building on examples which has been already done in certain authoritarian systems. Let's call China, okay? And what I was feeling, it was just a direct reaction to that, instead of putting too much invention into the Act itself.
Atoosa, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think another discussed application is the use of these systems for developing lethal autonomous weapons. So there has been a lot of discussions around this for years. There's been a lot of campaigning. Unfortunately, these systems has been used in some wars against people in Libya, Afghanistan. And so basically the idea is that you develop these autonomous systems, and so they are employed in war zones, and some functions of these systems are given functions where they can decide at spot whether this is a target that deserves to be attacked and bombed. So that is, again, another area of discussion, whether we have to ban the application of these general purpose systems for those.
And also that showed us an example about the car. So let's decide where should the car should go. I would be really curious about your opinion. What do you think? What might Tesla should decide in this situation where you need to decide one person or four-person crash?
I get to ask the questions, you know, to answer the question. No, in that kind of situation, you know what? I'm going to give a good lawyer's answer. I'm not going to answer the question, but I will make a comment that's really interesting. If you guys have a chance, go on to this. It's kind of fun. It's called the MIT Moral Machine. MIT Moral Machine, and they give you these crash choice examples, and you have to choose, are you going to save the baby and run over the three people, and you go through them, and then at the end of that, it shows your decisions in relation to the millions of people that have done these crash scenarios. And one thing that's really interesting to me, coming back to our points on ethics and trust and decision making, is what they found is that in different parts of the world, because of the cultures in those parts of the world, these kinds of decisions on the streetcar can end up differently. So that's interesting how that relates to these systems that are in one place but implemented globally. So when you're talking about things like ethics and morality, you can't necessarily implement the ethics of one society into a place a third of the way around the world, even if the system is global. So I'll ask a question, what does Tesla do? Do they have different command structure in Europe than they might in some other place of the world. So I hope you like that, the way I didn't answer your question.
I really have to add something because I really love this thing. And if you go to this MIT demonstration site, it's not fun. It's the most frustrating thing ever because you have to decide between these type of scenarios whom to kill. A baby or an older man, a robber or a doctor, a female or a male. Do you like that type of decisions? No, it's really frustrating. I think there are 11 scenarios, and I usually show it to my students. And usually they feel, I can read on their face that I hate you, I hate this task, I don't want to choose, it's just not morally right, whatever. But there was one scenario, and I have to add that my class was full of Norwegian students. Maybe it can make a difference. So, and they saw that two things that they have to decide between, and they immediately said A. And I said, what the fuck? I mean, why? All the previous ones were so hard to decide. Can you guess? I mean, you've never seen the pictures. What you saw on the pictures, you can see that how many people are in the car, so the passengers, how many pedestrians, their age, their gender, their, yeah, you have an idea? Yeah, one of the decisions you have to make whether you would switch lanes. No, that wasn't that. Okay, the pedestrians, they decided to kill them because they went under the red light. As a Hungarian, I mean, obeying rules. And they saw that the light was red, and they said, okay, so that's very easy to decide. So culturally,
I mean, this red light points out. I feel I have to answer your question briefly. I would take the utilitarian approach as our kind guest did today. I'm sorry for that gentleman that was alone is going to be knocked off, but I would, God forbid, if you're ever in that situation, I would save the four at the sacrifice of the one.
But just adding something, so after this experiment was released, a lot of people looked into this experiment, and they kind of say, those are not really the decision that the Tesla machine wants to take. Those are not the frequent decisions the Tesla machine needs to take or any other autonomous drive. But these experiments are really good because they push us to think in a robust way about different ethical scenarios. But at the end of the day, how many scenes would the Tesla machine face where there is a child here and then there is 4 other people there and then it needs to kind of like decide. So that's also something I want to add. Okay.
All right, so it seems like we have certain AI systems like public social scoring, which is out of the picture, and certain other systems that might be out of the picture. And then there are high-risk systems where we require a layered transparency. We require explanations about how it works. We require transparency about how it affects us. And we require continuous auditing, maybe. So is that sufficient for trust? Is that what we need for trust? Are these the ingredients for creating trust in AI systems, or do we need something more?
I think I want to a little bit push back on this idea of whether a social scoring system is universally bad. It's not universally bad because countries that are not democratic countries...
Banned, sorry.
Countries that are not democratic countries are using this kind of systems, right? And then that adds like a very complicated dimension to this whole discussions of regulating and governing AI systems, because many people are now talking about global governance of artificial intelligence. So the idea is that many different nations that are developing the systems, like China, the US, UK, many other countries, would sit together, and then they need to discuss how we have to govern these artificial intelligence systems. And there are various different endorsements of political values and moral values, and it's very, very hard to see whether they are all going to agree that, for example, social scoring system should be banned, right? Like, so there are local regulation and governance of AI systems, and there are questions about the global governance, and the questions of trust that you're raising at the global scale would become much more complicated.
Okay, so let's go back to social scoring systems. Can you help us imagine what such a system looks like, just for us to have a grasp on it? If any of you were here in the morning, or not in the morning, but early in the afternoon, there was a documentary which showed a facial recognition system which immediately recognizes you once you cross the red light and subtracts some of your social scores. But that seems to me just like a fragment of a bigger system. So can someone enlighten me how I should envision such a public scoring system?
Well, I have to say the emphasis here is the public scoring system, right? Because there are millions of systems which are scoring and grading and ranking people non-publicly, and this is fully accepted, as I understood. Well, how it could be imagined that the decision is that whether you are a good citizen or you're a bad citizen, right? You can collect points to become a good citizen, and you can lose points by doing stuff, for example, leaving your COVID quarantine. You can lose points, and then after all, you will become a bad citizen, and you will have access to certain rights or benefits based on the grade or score that the system assigns to you.
So, yeah, Ted, go ahead.
Add there as a side, arguably, at least in the U.S., there is a sort of social scoring system in place now. It's called your credit score, which everybody has. FICO score is the terminology. You have a credit score, and not only can that be used in determining whether you're going to get a loan and what interest rate you'll get. Now, it is based on borrowing money, paying it back, and that kind of thing, but employers can look at your credit score and factor that in terms of an employment decision. So it's beyond just using it for credit purposes, because they say, oh, this person has a low credit score. They're maybe not so reliable. Maybe they won't show up to work on time. You know, they're not the type of person that we want. So it may not be called a social credit score, but it's a social score, but it's a score that is being used.
Yeah, if you remember in the documentary, there was a line like, these kind of systems are unimaginable in the West. Maybe Ted has
Sorry, before you go.
shown a new light on that.
I'm a teacher and I love my students. And once we had to talk about this social scoring system, and you know, all the Westerners just, oh, Jesus Christ, if it's gonna become, I don't know, so if they're going to apply it in our system, in our country, I cannot imagine, blah, blah, blah. And there was a Chinese boy sitting, smiling at the end of the class. He just said, here are my scores. And we didn't even have questions. And can you imagine all the Westerners from the UK? They, how can you live like that? It's just unimaginable, blah, blah, blah. And he just smiled politely and thought, I'm a good citizen, so I don't have anything to be afraid for. So it was psychologically so intense to feel that what it's like from the inside.
And again, it goes back to this question of trust. So for example, in China, I also have a similar experience with students. Students told me they really trust the government, so the government can give them an image of a good citizen, and many of them would buy into, or some of them would buy into this image, and then they really trust the government that they are doing things in order to ensure that the citizens become good citizens. Whereas in many other countries, this kind of trust does not exist, and so, yeah, just this issue of trust happens and occurs at many different levels of relationship between us, the society, and artificial intelligence.
Thank you. And Norbert, I wanted, that's
super brief comment on trust. We're talking about trust like it's a good thing, and I get that. We need to feel comfortable using these systems. But you could also look at it like trust is not a good thing. You don't want to always be trusting these systems and taking that at face value. And I think that's what we've seen with the ChatGPT. I mean, it just lies to you. It bold-faced lies to you without any qualification. There's this 70% probability that this is accurate system. So in a way, I hope we don't get to the place of 100% trust in these systems. I hope there's always a little bit of this, trust but verify concept involved.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and we'll put a pin on that and get back to that. But I wanted to ask Norbert about what specific challenges do you face when designing digital financial products which you want to make trustworthy?
I mean, one of the most sensitive topic is your financial situation and your behavior, and that you need to be very careful. Like, for example, as we are designing a financial product for MSMEs, micro and small medium enterprises, and you can see all the data, all the depths between them. You can see everything. And you need to be very careful when you are using their data. You need to get the consent, of course, and after analyzing the data and give back any insights, because there are two types of insights what you can get from the system. The first is which is useful. The second is which is scary. So I don't want to get an insight, because if I get this insight, I will think about that. How do you know that? And what are the other important insights you know me about? But maybe one good news for you. I also worked at the bank, and you mentioned Revolut has 25 million users. That in terms of banks, there is a huge legacy systems and environments, technological environment, which means that they have a lot of data, but they cannot use right now. So this is the good news, right? But of course, Revolut is a different story. They are tech guys, they are geeks like me. So this is a very different story, because they are using our data very well and very deeply.
Any comments on that? So let's get back to Tad's point about not only developing trust, but developing certain critical stances and certain skills about knowing when to trust and when not to trust. So I wanted to ask you, what kind of skills do we need to be equipped with as of today to deal with AI becoming a more and more important social actor in our lives?
I think that just we need to realize that this is a system with high intelligence without any consciousness. So you cannot trust in them right now. I think that this is what you have to know. And also, I think that one of the principles what we need to take if we are thinking about regulation is that we should put the same amount of effort and money what we are putting into the development of AI, putting into education, clarifying things, evangelizing, the whole thing, and educate ourselves to using this tool, because I think that this is the most important thing. It's a very useful tool. It develops and increase our efficiency, but we need to use and don't trust it too much, and don't use it for something which is not good. If you want to use for, I don't know, emotional things and discussions, you need to go to a psychologist and not talking with ChatGPT, I think.
I think we started some move in this direction, specifically in the field of misinformation, right? Which is a very, very niche problem in transparency and trust, where actually you can have online systems where you can verify the information. For example, there is one system maintained by the Indiana University called Botometer, where you can actually simply send a tweet and it will tell you whether it is a true information or it's a false information. And also, like, global companies should hold actual responsibility in this, that those information what they're providing us, they verify, or at least grade, or they give a score, their certainty that that information is true or not.
My piece of advice would be that, about trust and distrust, that you always have to keep in mind, for example, when talking to ChatGPT, that you are talking to a machine. I mean, and sometimes you're talking to a mirror, because it's going to mirror your thoughts. So if you ask and you can prompt in the right way, it's gonna answer you the right way. So you must know the term echo chambers. In the era of social media, we used it to describe that we live in a filter bubble full of like-minded people, and it's getting close and tinier. But if you're talking to ChatGPT, you don't have an echo chamber full of like-minded people. You have you and your mirror all over the place. So, do you know what I talk about? Have you heard about the Belgian guy who talked about, I don't know, his relational problems and depression and suicidal thoughts, and talked to ChatGPT for a few hours, few days, and he committed suicide because ChatGPT said, yeah, that was the right decision. So he agreed because he wanted ChatGPT to agree. Okay.
I think it's a very dangerous relationship with this kind of machines because Sam Altman, and Sam Altman is the CEO of OpenAI, and they consciously designed the whole user experience based on a dialogue discussion. And because of this kind of interaction between human and machine, immediately gives you a feeling of trust, because this is a very intimate relationship, and that was consciously designed. So be careful with the user experience designers as well, because they know the cognitive vulnerability, and sometimes, unfortunately, they are using as well.
More and more scared of you. Okay, and maybe you heard Harari's opinion on that, first that was information, and then or attention, and now or intimacy. Because we talk to ChatGPT or any other models like an oracle. So we really want to have some financial advice or private life advice or therapeutical advice, and yeah, we're gonna listen to a machine.
Yeah, I would just add to the previous points. I think we should really resist this temptation to say that AI systems bring us comfort, and therefore it's okay to have them in many areas. I think that is a wrong approach. That is a wrong path to go on. Some AI systems that are designed very carefully, they are very good. They are bringing us comfort, and they've been used in medicine and transportation, education in a good way. But we have a lot of AI systems that are really unnecessary to be out there. They are out there, and they are definitely not bringing of us comfort. And I think another issue that is becoming more and more important is to always think about the relationship between AI and politics. So for very long, we thought, oh, AI systems are these technical systems, and then we just use them, we design them, and politics is this complicated, messy thing we don't need to be involved in. But over the past couple of decades, we've seen more and more that not government, but another entity, the big tech, for example, in the United States, are developing the systems, are collecting all of the data, and are basically giving us all of the systems. And so they are getting a very interesting, complicated, sometimes dangerous political power in the whole world, not just within the United States. And I think that's the problem with that. And just trying to really unpack what we are doing in this kind of like ecosystem is just what should be done. And I think critical reflections on a lot of these systems and relations are super important. And critical reflection doesn't mean becoming pessimist, right? It just means that we need to question various different things. Things that are given to us are not true, are not coming from good intentions, right? We can be good, we need to resolve problems. I'm a very optimistic person, but engraving and developing these critical skills are just super, super important, that I think governments need to design different educational programs for all ages, because these AI systems are just impacting all aspects of our lives, and that's, I think, should be a main focus.
I think that we need to realize and be aware that first in our history we created a system, and we outsourced the two important skills of a human. The first is the decision-making skill of us. The second is the idea generation, the creativity. And I think that, these are, maybe this is the key of our evolution. And now we are planning to outsource those skills for a machine. So I think that this is what we need to, just be aware and design the rules and regulation responsibly.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Norbert. And if I might jump in with one personal example from me, I'm teaching critical reasoning at CU and also at Milestone Institute and various philosophy courses. And these days I need to deal with the fact that my most favorite way of assessment was essay writing. And now there's ChatGPT, which can also generate an essay in 1 second. And we have very interesting discussions with my students about the value of creativity that Norbert just mentioned, which is facing a blank page and trying to ideate from scratch and trying to still foster that skill of yours, even if you could just generate a first draft and then edit it, which is also an awesome skill. But I think it's a good example for being very aware of what skill are you outsourcing and might be losing by implementing such a system.
But I do believe that there is a balance. For example, in terms of this blank paper effect, if I'm collecting ideas from an out-of-blue thinker, which is definitely ChatGPT, maybe my ideas will be better and more creative. So I think that this is also, it's not like you shouldn't use for essay writing ChatGPT, because there are a lot of out-of-blue ideas, but I think that you need to know is not outsourcing 100% the task, because it's, our intelligence will decrease, definitely.
Yeah, wholly agreed. So finally, any tangible advice as to what kind of sources to go to develop this critical attitude of knowing when to trust, when not to trust, being able to navigate a social world which has a new actor, a new kind of actor? What would you recommend? Would you recommend listening to a lot of podcasts, reading a lot of books? What do we do if we want to stay afloat?
I can start.
Please.
I can tell you my opinion and my life. I'm collecting information from Twitter, now called X application, since Elon Musk just renamed it. But I think that there you can find trustable tech CEOs or experts in the topic, and you can get first insight and first thoughts from them, and also, of course, podcasts. So unfortunately, right now, I haven't found any government supported site or educational platform, which is very needed, I think.
I think I again want to say that this educational part is just super important, because where we go with this AI is going to be a collective decision, and the collective is composed of all of us. So, for example, in the UK where I work, there are some independent institutes. One of them is called Ada Lovelace Institute, and they are designing a lot of very interesting reports introducing AI, introducing various ethical and social problems around the use of artificial intelligence. And I think all of the governments should do this. Regarding the issues about ethics and law, I personally prefer if those pieces not necessarily are just coming from big tech, because big tech want us to think in a very specific way about how we have to think about social implications of these systems. The good news is that there are a lot of independent institutes, a lot of independent courses and books that have been written on these topics. And I think it's very good if we kind of absorb those knowledges that are coming from people which do not have a close connection to big tech, and they basically come from a more neutral perspective, telling us about the issues and questions. And one other thing is that I think it's very important if all of us practice intellectual humility. You know, sometimes we just read one or two pieces about ethics of AI or this and that, and then we just feel that, oh, now we know a lot about many of these topics. But I think it's good to keep on reading and knowing that these are all evolving every day, and so we need to be keeping our knowledge updated.
I'm going to have a university course at ELTE called AI Literacy. That's my way to spread the...
I have two things to add. First is nothing to add, but just to go in the line like the others, that this is our responsibility, and this is, I think, 80% of my time to think about how to bring this critical thinking and doubtful approach to my students to any information they get through these systems. But there is another side of this. We are talking about AI systems like the great evil, right? But people are developing these systems, and they are not evil, and they are not developing evil systems. And their goal should be and could be and hopefully is to develop something which is accountable, transparent, ethical, and moral. And I think this is a big problem for them as well, how to develop systems like this. Sometimes the technology is reaching a surface, reaching a stage where this progress is surfacing, and this is what happened right now with the, for example, with the ChatGPT. But in the background, actually, these systems are developed along those lines, maybe not for marketing reasons, but on the scientific side, where these values are actually kept in mind.
So, thank you so much for this super intriguing and in-depth discussion. And thank you, Ted. Thank you, Norbert, Márton, Adrienn, Atoosa. Thank you so much.